Joe Stiglitz, I mean, as an economist, you had always pointed to some of these flaws in the project, things that might go wrong. Is that all coming true? And do you see the same lessons as Gabor in terms of needing to have a political integration to make this work?
Well, I mean, that's what you began with, is the view that there needed to be more political integration to make the euro work. That was very clear. And many American commentators on the euro at the time said, optimistically, this was an unfinished project, and there will be a crisis sometime down the line. And the hope was when that crisis occurred, there would be an effective response. And I think the general sense is there hasn't. One of the reasons that there hasn't is that there are two very different conceptions of what went wrong. And I think this discussion has brought that out very, very clearly. And I'll just say I think David's totally right. And it echoes much of what I saw when I was chief economist of the World Bank and saw the bailouts in East Asia, Argentina, Latin America, and so forth. And there were two ways of describing those bailouts. One of them was they were a bailout of Mexico or a bailout of Argentina. The other one is they were a bailout of Citibank. They were a bailout of American Western banks. And the true description from an economic point of view is very clear, and even from a political point of view. They were a bailout of the lenders. They were a bailout of the big banks who had not done their job in lending. So, you know, you talk about this, the word sinners you use, but every loan has a lender and a borrower. And the person who is supposed to be more informed about the criteria of lending should be the guy who manages risk, which is the bank. And these are the guys that consistently did a bad job. Now, partly, it's understandable. They were very politically connected. They were in the White House. They were in every government. And so they knew when they lent badly, their friends in the White House would bail them out. And they were perfectly correct. I was in at the Council of Economic Advisors when the first of these began in the Mexican bailout. So why are we bailing out American lenders? Why do we use the name Mexican bailout? This is not a bailout of Mexico. So that seems to me, the way you frame this is absolutely critical. Then you ask the question, let's go back and think about what are the economic frameworks that are going to be necessary to make the European project work, the euro work. And the basic idea here was very simple. You've taken away two important instruments of adjustment, interest rate and exchange rate. And you hadn't really put anything in its place. Now, just as an example, just to give you one of the ironies here, the crisis, the worst manifestation of the crisis was Iceland. I don't know if you remember the joke, what was the difference between Iceland and Ireland? One letter in 6 months.
Thank you very much.
But anyway, the point was Iceland had a much worse crisis, but now they're doing pretty well. You know, not great, but pretty well because they had a flexible exchange rate and they restructured their debt. What's happened in Europe is they've not allowed it to restructure the debt. They've bailed out German banks, in effect, and they've kept the countries, put the burden on Ireland and Greece and the other countries, which is beyond their ability to pay. It will happen. I mean, I think it almost inevitably will happen unless there is a real commitment of a European project. I don't see that underlying on the way. Let me explain what I mean by that. Japan has a 200%, more than 200% debt GDP ratio. It's not a problem, at least right now. If interest rates are 2% and 1%, a 200% debt GDP ratio means you have to pay 2, 3, 4% of GDP to service your debt, and countries can do that. So if there were a real commitment to have the European project succeed, interest rates would be low, the countries could repay, and there's no bailout. It's just making sure that they can repay. On the other hand, if you start trying to make profits off of the members of your family, which is what the German and other governments are doing. They're, you know, quite proud about the fact that we lent money to Greece at 5% or 6%, and we borrowed at only 1 or 2%. We just, look at, we make several $100 million out of profits from our, quote, neighbors. You know, this is a nice family relationship here. You're making, so if you're going to charge 6%, and you have a debt GDP ratio of 150%, that's 9% of GDP, it will go down the drain. And there will be restructuring, and they'll have to pick up, the Germans will have to pick up the cost of restructuring the German banks because there will be that kind of restructuring, and there should be. So it's really a political decision which of these alternatives Europe wants to go. Does it want to really help, does it really believe in European solidarity, or does it want to have a restructuring?